Give me liberty and give me a net.
To Life, Liberty, and Happiness, a podcast where I talk about the Constitution, politics, history, and pretty much anything else I want to talk about. This podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, youtube.com/Annette Talks, and AnnetteTalks.com. And today we're kind of covering a little bit of politics, but mostly the other category, because I would like to talk about the pandemic, the lockdowns, and everything that goes along with those, and the effects that they've had on our mental health. So today I have joining me Dr. Christy Kane. Hi, Christy.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And I met you through a good friend, Kevin Baker, who probably doesn't mind me mentioning his name. But and I don't know you personally, but I have read your website and you come highly recommended. And so I'm just going to read your little bio that I found on your website. It says, Christy Kane, PhD, CMHC. Is CMHC like clinical mental health counselor? All right, got it.
Got it correct.
Founder, so Christy is a licensed mental health clinician, business leader, and mother who believes in empowering people through positive mental health. Described as insightful and empowering, Christy teaches communities and organizations how to embrace mental health. Christy is leading a movement to help us reconnect. Christy is a counselor, sought-after speaker, and published author of Shell Cracking. So I like what it says about helping us reconnect, because right now we're in a time when it's hard to connect with people, at least in person anyway. And right. You have a practice, you do therapy or counseling, and what all do you do?
Yeah, so I run a mental health stabilization company that does stabilization platforms in corporations and education systems like schools. And then I still have a private practice. I do therapy in Highland, Salt Lake, and Provo in Utah. And then I do a lot of telehealth that lets people see me from across the country. And I, like you mentioned, the one book I have, and then I have a second book coming out. But I really focus on the preventative side of mental health versus just intervention, so that we can try to get ahead of this crisis. I'm glad you're focusing on this today, because the number one crisis in the United States is mental health. We spend more money. As a matter of fact, it's estimated over $300 billion last year, just in the field of dealing with costs for mental health. You know, and for a long time in our society, we didn't talk about mental health, right? It was one of those hush, hush, in the closet, don't bring it out of the closet. Well, now we've brought it out of the closet, but we're not talking about it with accurate information, correct data, and we're still swinging too far on intervention versus prevention. So this radio program is great to allow some thoughts about preventative processes. So I'm glad you're doing this.
And I'm assuming that 2020 probably saw an uptick big time in amount of money spent on mental health, because the lockdowns have caused so much. Are you seeing a lot of increase in anxiety and depression and suicide?
No. Statistically, we're seeing high increases in domestic violence.
Oh, right.
We're seeing increase in child abuse. We're seeing increases, yes, in the area of anxiety and depression. Suicide is having kind of a mixed analysis. Some states are reporting higher, some are reporting lower. But overall, we're seeing a social crisis. You know, we're designed biologically for human connection. Neurologically, when we spend time with people face to face, our brain releases the oxytocin neurotransmitter. That's the human bonding chemical that we all need. It stabilizes us. You know, I tell parents, I've done a lot of research, and one of the research items I did was 8 hugs a day for 8 seconds to decrease anxiety and depression. And if other people have used my research and lectured on that. But when we've taken this isolation play, you know, yes, I understand, you know, governments get concerned about a pandemic, but the pandemic of mental health, I think, has been impacted far more than the pandemic of the COVID-19 virus, right? And sometimes I wished we had hindsight before we had foresight, but, you know, it'd be nice if we'd look at the full picture. You're going to lock everybody up. You're going to have everybody isolating, but what's going to be the social impact to our society, you know?
Yeah, it's funny because when it first happened, there was an article I found online. It had been written by a few doctors, and I can't remember what their specialties were, but they laid out, this was well before, this is written 2 or 3 years ago, and it laid out the potential ramifications of a lockdown for a pandemic. And it went through all the different potential problems, and one of them being mental health issues because people aren't connecting. And it was funny, at the very end, they said, we don't recommend it. We recommend that you quarantine the sick and you protect the at risk, and everyone else goes about their lives as normal. And I thought, why was this never even considered when governors started looking at locking down? Why was it automatically just, we're going to lock everybody down, we're not even going to think about the ramifications, and we're just going to do it? And even now we're at the point where we've seen ramifications, and yet they're still doing it. It's amazing to me.
It's interesting what fear does to society, right? And I don't have answers, and I'm not involved in that full political arena as to why they do that. But I will say that the mental health impact has been, it's over the top. It's done two things, actually. It's increased all of our rates that we look at, but it's also put a microscope on mental health. And so if there's a positive, and not that there's much positive, but I think for the first time, 2021 is going to be about mental health. Mm-hmm. I really think this pandemic put a microscope on a part of our society that we've done a very poor job at managing and recognizing. Pioneers had physical struggles, pushing wagons, daily survival. We are in a mental zone with a very old brain trying to process a network of society and electronic impact. I don't know if you've seen The Social Dilemma.
Yes.
But that our brain isn't really meant to do. And because of that, we are seeing this fixation within these polarizations of our communities and political opinions. And we're seeing such rates of extreme rates of inability to self-regulate, because people are fixating because of the way this whole electronic delivery stuff is doing. And then add on top of that, we don't talk about mental health. We make it a shame. You don't say to someone who has cancer, what did you do wrong? But you just say to someone who's bipolar, oh, well, where'd you screw up?
Right.
We are, as scientists, I think it's cool that we're able to do so much more imaging of the brain. We can prove more now than ever before that when people are dealing with anxiety, depression, bipolar, it's a brain issue. Just like when cells go off the rail for cancer, it's the same thing going on in the brain. And so I think 2021 will be our mental health year. This pandemic really has some things.
Even I've talked about this on Facebook a lot, but I would say my mental health generally is fairly good. I'm pretty self-aware. I know I'm highly sensitive, so I have to manage my anxiety. I can see when, I'm starting to get overloaded. But even someone like me who feels like they're fairly well regulated, I've had 2 or 3 little, what I would call mini meltdowns this year, because it's just been too much. It's like, okay, so first we have the fear of the pandemic that, we're given back in March, right? I've never really been afraid of it, but I can see a lot of people are, because they're buying into what they're seeing on the news and they get hyper-focused on that. But so you've got that. Then they start shutting things down that we really need, like church. I couldn't go to church for a long time. And that's where we get to go and socialize with our friends and worship and do things that are helpful to us. And then they shut down school. And then, so I have kids at home doing school. I mean, there have been so many things. And then you go on Facebook and everyone's fighting with each other over how things are. It's just been too much. This last year was just too much. And so I feel for people who already started out the year in a fragile mental state, right? Someone who was already clinically depressed or already dealing with extreme anxiety. And then you pile all this on top, and then, the job losses, and people stuck at home. I got divorced about 5.5 years ago, and I'm grateful it happened then and not now, or I'm grateful it happened before 2020, because I can't imagine being in a bad marriage, stuck at home with a spouse, 24/7, because that's where all the abuse comes in, right? And then children who aren't at school, who are with abusive parents. It's just been too much. Who do you think has been affected most? Like, you think kids or these senior citizens in nursing homes? Where are you seeing the most impact?
That's a good question. I haven't seen any statistical analysis on breakdown of age group, and so I don't know that I can answer who I think is affected the most, but I think there's been very much a crisis for our kids because their whole network of going to school and learning has been disrupted. I work in the education system, and teachers are so overwhelmed. Just think about them. But they're trying to teach online, half virtual. Kids one day think they're going to be in classroom, next day they're going to be home. And so there's this dynamic of insecurity across the board. There are kids getting lost because they don't have access to electronics. So they're further and further behind in school. You can definitely see a socioeconomic problem division because, some of your lower income homes have no electronics, don't have internet. And so the isolation is astronomical. I mean, think of kids that the only meals they get is when they go to school, right? And so I think the young people have been dramatically impacted. Now, the only advantages I think they have a little bit is they're more resilient. Kids bounce a little bit better than adults do. But yeah, then take your elderly who, don't get visited that much anyways, and then rely on the holidays or the family gatherings to kind of give them that yearly fix, and they can't have that. And so we've just disrupted our whole social. I mean, we're used to people going to work and kids going to school. And, when we're seeing divorce rates and domestic violence and abuse going up, even in families where perhaps there was never difficulty, there's so much high stress levels, and then there's no release. How do you release stress? Well, I go to the gym every morning and do kickboxing, and I'm lucky my gym hasn't closed the whole time. It did for a little bit, so I had to buy a punching bag and put it downstairs. It was no fun, right? We go talk to friends when we're stressed out. You mentioned people attend their religious services. So not only did we disrupt our normal social economic processes, then we denied people their outlets, right? Yeah. Even people perhaps who socialize because they hang out at a bar at Friday night. I mean, people do lots of different things, and it's all been disrupted.
Oh yeah, I can't go to a dance right now.
Or for people who like to dance.
Ready to go to a small gathering yesterday or last night for New Year's Eve, and I'm in the bathroom getting ready, and I have the music on. I start dancing. I'm like, it's been a long time since I've been able to go to a dance with other people and get together and dance. And that's kind of been a big deal. Or firesides, parties. I mean, I have been having gatherings all along because I've always thought this was ridiculous. And, I've kept them small, but I can see singles, because I'm single. I can see other singles really struggling right now, especially divorced singles who don't have children at home. Yeah. And they're alone and they're isolated. The holidays, I've seen people really struggling, and I think this is just not right. And so I've had some gatherings and said, people come over. You want to wear a mask, you can, but we need to get together and we need to socialize and be there for each other. Now, one thing I think is that kids might handle the whole mask issue better. Like I have a hard time dealing with masks at all, partly because of my high sensitivity, but also partly because I feel like I'm being muzzled. And I go out and I can only see eyes, and I can't see smiles and things. And so, but kids don't seem to have that same problem. My kids and I will go out and we'll go to Target or something, and they'll stick their masks on in the car, and I'll be waiting until I'm walking right through that front door. And they're like, Mom, put your mask on. Mom, put your mask on. What do you think about that whole thing? Do you think that's something that is going to have a long-term effect on us as far as we masked up for all that time? And do you think
I think there's some fascinating studies on the social facial communication amongst humans, right? And different cultures recognize different facial expressions with different messages, but we still all rely on visual cues.
Mhm.
I know as a therapist, it's been rather interesting to do therapy where I see this much of my client,
Oh, yeah.
and I rely on physical cues as much as I do verbal cues.
Mhm.
And so I do think there's an impact lasting. I don't know how lasting it will be if we can get back to being able to have those facial visual cues. But I can tell you this, I noticed this about myself and it was weird. I never thought I'd back up when a person walked towards me. And I noticed I did that a couple times because, there's a 6 feet away thing. And without thinking, I just stepped back and I went, I don't want this to be my go-to MO.
Mhm.
I want to shake hands. I mean, just that simple gesture. And now you go to, I don't know about you, but when it first happened, I'd go to extend my hand and go, oh yeah, I can't shake your hand. And so there's some basic human gestures of our culture that I hope we get back to. Then you go to China. Even before the pandemic, you look at their culture where lots of people wore masks just because of the air.
Yeah.
And so their culture was like, oh, we're already doing this. But yeah, I hope this isn't permanent. We need to see each other's facial expressions. We need to embrace, we need to touch. And so I'm really hoping as this pandemic gets out of the way, we get herd immunity, that we just get back to normal.
Yeah.
People say, well, Dr. King, what's normal? Well, normal, we know, is humans are meant to connect.
Mhm.
That's a normal homeostasis. I mean, I'm sure you remember it. When was it? In the 80s, early 90s, they went into the orphanages, right, in Romania and Russia, remember? And all the little kids were dying, and it wasn't because they weren't fed or changed, it's because they weren't being touched.
Mhm.
And so I don't know that we have people die. Well, I mean, we have people who commit suicide because they're socially isolated and just give up on life because we need human interaction. So I just hope we get back to normal.
Yeah, we're starting to see more and more people who are realizing that, because I have been attending the school district board meetings here virtually, of course. And the first one that was back in the summer before school started, because they wanted to bring school back in person. And I'm like, yes, let's do this. And we had so many parents come on and say, no, it's not safe. I'm too scared or whatever. Well, this last one that we had about 3 weeks ago, oh boy, was it different. All the parents, including myself, I was the nicest one, and I'm pretty emphatic. All these parents came on and said, my kids are doing so awful right now. They're isolated. They're lonely. They're sad. These kids need to be back in school. I thought it was funny because I thought, where were you guys back in August when I was saying this? But people are starting to realize this is not healthy. And when you see that, like, teenagers are the ones that are most at risk, teenage girls, of suicide, these high school girls need to be back in school with their peers. In the middle school, I have a daughter in middle school. I want her back in school with her peers. And so I'm glad that people are starting to finally wake up and realize this is super important. So what do you think we should do as far as if we see friends that are struggling, or if we're struggling with anxiety or depression, and a lot of it has to do with all this being locked down and isolated?
So I'm gonna address one thing and then I'll answer your question.
Okay.
Connection needs to be a conversation with adults and their kids. We've got to help our teenagers get out of the electronic world and back to face. And it's been a nice thing that this COVID has started to have young people say, I want off the device. I want humans. And so parents, I'm not sure who all your audience is, Annette, but parents need so much to explain to their kids what is appropriate human connection feelings, and the need for connection. We're in this very interesting electronic, sexualized, weird, strange world. And foundational for our young people is they're getting so much misinformation, false information, and overstimulation from that, electronic device, that parents need to get kids out of the electronic world, back to human connection, face to face, arm in arm, knee to knee, eye to eye, to help stabilize. Our biggest crisis is our young people on mental health.
Mm-hmm.
The World Health Organization declared in, I think, 2018, might have been 2019, that the major depressive disorder is the #1 health issue for adults in the world, ahead of oncology and cardiovascular.
Wow.
And for our young people, it's anxiety, depression, and suicide ideation is the second leading cause of death for our young people.
Wow.
And so parents we really need to infuse the connection. And to answer your question now, if people start feel lonely, depressed, anxiety, we have to start using mental health treatment modalities as a norm. You know, it's funny how if we're going to go see a medical doctor, everybody can talk about it, but if we're going to go see a counselor, we don't want to. We have to shift that. So one thing I'd say is if you're feeling depressed or anxiety, go visit with a mental health professional. You know, it doesn't mean I'm not pro medication. I mean, medication as needed, because we know there's true chemical imbalances, but evidence-based research shows that everybody gets better. By 90% of the people who go visit with a counselor start getting better. That doesn't mean they're cured, but they start feeling better. We need to reach out. You know, there's something interesting in the culture of religions. And I know in my faith, it's a little bit, everybody loves to serve, but nobody wants to receive.
Yeah.
Like everybody loves to give, but everybody's afraid to ask. And the biggest thing that singles can do, those who are isolated, is don't assume people are going to read your mind, and don't assume people know that you need them. Ask, pick up the phone, tell somebody you're not okay. I believe as humans, we want to help. We're just so busy and oblivious sometimes that all we need is for someone to say, hey, I'm not okay, Dr. Kane, or hey, Christy, I'm not all right. I'll be there in 5 minutes. What do you want to do? You want to do a Zoom team meeting? Do you want to do a Zoom, whatever? Or let's sit on the porch 6 feet apart. Let's do whatever it is. But part of the problem is when we get depressed or anxious, especially on the depression side, we don't know how to ask. We get paralyzed. And so the sooner we can be proactive at the beginning, we might avoid that paralysis, because when it gets far enough down the rabbit hole, oftentimes they don't feel like they can do anything. But we've got to start asking and talking.
Great. You know, and I think that's interesting as well. And I see it more in men than I do in women. I don't know if it's that you see the same thing, that unwillingness to go to counseling. There's like a stigma attached to it. Whereas honestly, I feel like everyone in the world could benefit from counseling at one time or another. I've always had really wonderful counselors, and it's always made a world of difference for me. I have no hesitation at all of saying I have great counselors, and I go whenever I feel like I need it. Mm-hmm. And if you get a good one, they give you tools. So it's not like you necessarily have to go all the time, but you get the tools, and then you can remember to use those tools. But it's really nice to know that those people are there when you just can't seem to get those tools, or you just need a little extra help. And so I really wish people would realize it's no different than going to the doctor. I need to go see my counselor. You know, I'm having a lot of anxiety or depression, which I find are two sides of the same coin. And especially being highly sensitive, I can see when the anxiety is starting to happen, and I can see when the depression is starting to happen. And I've learned through counseling and education how to manage those. Right. But a lot of times it means I need to reach out to a friend too and say, hey, you know what? I need to talk to somebody. And
and that social communication creates that connection, which releases oxytocin. You know, I wonder sometimes in that if part of the mystery or what holds us back is, you know, people sometimes don't know who to ask or where to begin to see a counselor, right? Like we've done better in the medical world. Like if you've broken your arm, you go to a doctor who can set the bone, right? Mm-hmm. If you think you might have cancer, you go to a specialist in that field. I don't think people realize that there's mental health professionals that specialize in certain areas. And I don't think they know even where to begin to ask. Like, okay, so I need to see a doctor. Okay, what do you need to see the doctor for? Well, you know, I need to get stitches. Okay, go to urgent care. I need to see a mental health counselor. Okay, what do you need to see the counselor for? You know, so I think maybe if we get better at saying, this is how you find a counselor. This is what counselors specialize in. Realize that you're in charge. Like I tell all my clients the first time they sit in my office, it's about them, not about me. And they need to interview me and see if I'm the right person to be with them, because it's very much about a relationship. And they need to know if I have the expertise to treat what they're concerned about. And so people should ask friends, be frank in the office with the counselor. Say, hey, I want to treat this and this. Do you think you can do that? And find the people that you fit with. So I think if we started maybe helping people understand how to get to a counselor, maybe we'd solve that problem. I don't know. But I do think our younger generations are much better at it, right? It's no big deal to have a therapist. And I do think we're slowly lifting the shame, right?
So I really do.
Yeah.
Because why go around suffering if you don't need to? There's just no reason for that.
That's a very good question. It's, I love the fact, like I have clients who walk into my office and I'll say to them, how are you today? And they say, I'm fine, Dr. Kane. And I'm like, feelings in need of expression, FINE.
Oh, I've heard that before.
Because here's the 3 words I hate as a clinician. I'm okay, I'm good, I'm fine. The minute that gets said to me, I go, oh, so we're not good, we're not okay, and we're not fine. We do that as humans. And we need to be mindful enough that when our loved ones and our friends say, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm okay, we have this radar that says, you're not fine, you're not good, you're not okay, let's talk.
Not because it reminds me of how when we see people or we meet someone, hi, how are you? It's without fail, I'm good, how are you? It's not a genuine question. It's just, how you kind of grease the social wheels. And so it's almost like, well, everyone should just think I'm fine immediately. And then maybe if I get to know you a little bit and I trust you a little bit more, or we're in an in-depth conversation, then I'll open up. But we don't want to automatically just admit, not so great.
Okay, right.
Although
Yeah, it's interesting.
In a therapist's office, you would think that.
Yeah, but it takes a little bit for them. But, when I was at BYU on campus doing some stuff, I decided one day walking across campus, and I was a student, that if I got asked that, how are you, I was going to answer bad, terrible, horrible. And it was so funny because so many students said, oh, that's good. And I was like, you didn't even listen to what I said. And so you're right. We say it. And that's maybe something as humans we need to get better at. So, I'm just one of those people that if I ask you how you are and you give me good, fine, or okay, then we're going to have another question. Like, I'm like, even if it's the grocery clerk, I'm like, well, what does okay mean? Well, what does good mean? Well, what does fine mean? And I tell them my definition, feelings in need of expression. But I would hope that we recognize that in 5 minutes, we can change a life if we ask the right questions. And, I think as humans, and I think you've probably found this, Annette, if someone feels like someone's going to listen, and maybe it's because I wear the hat that I wear, right? I mean, I find an interesting process traveling on an airplane. When people ask me what I do, they either stop talking to me because they don't want to be analyzed, and I'm not analyzing, or I get told their life story. That's going to be my journey on the flight. What I found is most of us, if we feel like someone's listening for a moment, we usually are willing to share. It sometimes only takes a moment to shift a life,
I agree. And, it's funny because I'm single, and so I don't have a spouse at home to talk to. I have my kids, and they're not great conversationalists, not real great listeners, right? And so every once in a while, I will meet someone, and even if it's a first meeting, if we start talking and they ask the right question, I find myself just opening up, and I'm like, what the heck was that all about? And then I'll realize, oh, they were a good listener, and I obviously needed somebody to listen. And so I think that's one of those spiritual gifts that you hear about that you never think about, because we think spiritual gifts are like, oh, I can bear a fabulous testimony, or I can, I'm so sensitive to spiritual things. Whereas being a great listener, that's an awesome spiritual gift, I think, because everybody needs it.
Well, and it takes time, but it doesn't take that long. And, when we think about the times in our lives, and even in a therapist's office, that really impacted us, it's when we felt understood, right? You know, I remember going through my master's program. You're going to find this funny, but when I did my master's program, I didn't read the fine print so you have to do so many hours, right? Clinical hours. Well, I got a call from the dean of the college and I was due to graduate, and I'd worked really hard to get my really good 4.0. And, I was really proud of myself. And he goes, Christy, where's your clinical hours? And I said, I turned them in. I have 900 hours. Dr. Burnham signed them. We're good. And he goes, no, your clinical hours. And I said, I turned them in. Dr. Burnham signed them. And finally I go, Dr. Beck, what are you talking about? And he goes, Christy, as part of your master's program, you had to go see a counselor 12 times. And immediately I fired, I don't need a counselor. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not crazy. And it was funny because Dr. Beck goes, Christy, I expected this conversation with you. And I go, what do you mean? And he goes, well, if you haven't seen a counselor for 12 sessions before graduation, you will not be graduating. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. I don't need to see a counselor. I remember arguing with him and he said, well, you can get your diploma or you're not. It's your choice. And he hung up on me. And I remember sitting in my car going, I was like, I do not need a counselor. And finally I called a friend because I was like, but you're not going to graduate. So I called a friend and said, look, I got to see somebody 12 times in like the next 3 weeks. Who can I see? And luckily I met an amazing human being. Her name is Dr. Malovich. And it was amazing. It was one of the greatest things I did. And I didn't think I had anything to talk about. I was the one arguing, I'm fine. I'm perfect. I'm not broken. And then I wasn't fine. I wasn't perfect. And there were things that I needed to look at, It
was life-changing for you.
It was. And I was glad that was part of the master's program. And it was part of my doctorate as well.
Wow.
But, I still had that image and stigmatism. Here I was going to be a mental health professional to help people that were broken, but I was perfect. Yeah, no, I'm not perfect at all.
Well, I really do think everybody, but especially in this environment that we're in right now with the lockdowns and everything, I don't know how people are holding it together that don't have at least a good network of friends to talk to, or at least one or two good, sensitive, because I actually have friends that will call in and check in with me just to check in.
Yeah.
And if I say, oh, I'm fine, and then if they probe a little bit, then they'll get more. So right. I don't know how people are making it that don't have that.
Well, I think we have two paradigms coming out of that, Annette. I think we have people that are becoming, I think we're creating more antisocial communities, and not in the dark, cruel side. But we are diminishing people's ability to know how to connect. But out of that comes huge anxiety, huge depression, huge suicide rates. This electronic world, this flat screen, is creating optical visual stimulation. That's that dopamine, right? But it's depleting, and you can look at the research, empathy and sympathy. So empathy and sympathy don't play in the electronic world. Empathy and sympathy come with that face-to-face. Why is bullying, for example, such a horrible problem in schools today? Because A, it's delivered electronically, but B, it plays with the addictive neurotransmitter dopamine. It's a stimulating, thrilling neurotransmitter. And it doesn't, like when you and I talk face-to-face, we have to start feeling our words that we're saying to the person. And empathy and sympathy come with the oxytocin play, the bonding. And so we might think something, but that empathy tells us not to say it, or the sympathy, right? In that electronic world, empathy and sympathy are going away. Addiction stimulation is rising, and we're just creating this inability to connect. I mean, there's so much research that shows the younger people graduating right now, they don't connect the way the older generations did. They don't understand the team player dynamics. Even on their breaks, they're all sitting in a room on their phones.
Yeah, I was going to say, because they're also, I'm just as guilty as a lot of the young people of it, but my phone is like my life. And 90% of my communication is through that phone. And so that's got to have gotten much worse this last year, because people are not doing the in-person things. And so it seems to me like we need to as soon as possible, get back to in-person, or at least phone calls, or at least even this kind of thing, because I can see you and I can see your reactions. And this is better than, texting or Facebooking. But
yeah. And we've got to get back to it in simple ways, like you said, Zoom. But just think about this. We go to the grocery store, and I've many times thought about the poor grocery store clerk, because 90% of the people going through their line doesn't even want to talk to them. They're on their phone.
mhm.
And what if we just put our phones down when we went through the grocery line, so that the guy or the girl who checking us out thought they mattered? Or the waiter or the waitress who's waiting on us at a restaurant for those who could still go out to eat. It's just baffling to me, the isolation. So yeah, I don't think we've even begun to see the side effects of the mental health of this COVID. And what's going to be really critical is how quickly we allow mental health stabilization processes to happen. If we try to go back to, it didn't cause any harm, and everybody's fine, then our statistical rates are going to go through the roof. If we come out of this COVID and say, how did it impact us? Who are you seeing? Who are you talking to? Where do you need help? And we make mental health a much more bigger priority. Like if we come out of this and put our phones down, we come out of this, we go to the gym, we come out of this. I mean, you probably saw the studies from the University of Utah on spirituality and how beneficial that is for the neurological development of the brain.
Mhm.
If we come out of this and don't go back to the things the human body and the human brain needs, then I project, and I could be wrong, that the rates of mental health are going to be worse than they are now.
Mhm.
If we come out of this and say, we've got to fix this, we've got to go back to healthy activities like attending spiritual events, going back to school, spending time with families, getting back out in nature, because there's research that shows being in nature is beneficial for the brain. If we come out of this isolation with a desire to connect more than we have, we might have a chance to, minimize the impact. But I don't know, because I don't know that the right conversations are being had about it.
Well, I'm going to be having conversations like this all year. I've decided that for 2021, my podcast is going to be helping people to get through the remainder of this whole lockdown,
Pandemic.
everything, all of it. Yes. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this episode. And I'm going to be doing, as things come up like this, I'm going to continue to have conversations that I see that need to be had. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. So what would you recommend people do when they are done listening to this and they're thinking about their friends that are not doing so well, or they're not doing so well, that they need to just start reaching out to each other, and they need to reach out to mental health professionals and
Get them to see someone, offer to go with them. A lot of mental health professionals like myself and others are doing telehealth. It's not the same as in person. I still do in person. Some people don't. But, tell them, give them a name, take them. There's lots of things we can do. I've encouraged teenagers to do game night via Zoom, not on phones, but so there's at least a camera and they can see that interaction. Do the 6 feet apart visiting, go sit in the yard with a blanket and visit with a friend. Even if it's 6 feet apart, that face-to-face is better than that flat camera, right?
Yeah.
And then have the hard conversations. We have to get to where when we ask someone, are you okay? And they say yes, that we say, well, what does that mean?
Okay, so it was good, fine, and
Okay.
okay. So
Yeah.
when we hear good, fine, or okay from someone, we need to follow it up with another question. Like,
Yeah, because they might really be good, but we're so good at deflecting. I'm fine,
Mhm.
when they're really not.
Yeah, because we're not ready to open up. But if someone, like you said, if someone's willing to listen, then we probably will.
Because, just think about human nature. I know you probably have experienced this, Annette. Very few of us have walked away when someone starts telling us about a difficult story.
No, we'll hang in for that.
Or if they're in a hard place, right?
Right.
Because by nature, as humans, we desire to lift one another.
Yes.
Overall, as humans, we want to do what's good and right.
Yes, I agree. we need to give people the chance. Okay, I like that. I'm going to remember that from now on. Fine, good, or okay. I'm going to do a follow-up, and then I'm going to be there and listen. And I'm going to try and do more Zooming and less texting with friends. I like that because I've been Marco Poloing, which is okay, but this is better because it's instantaneous. It's immediate. So
look at AT&T. Was it AT&T or Ma Bell? Whoever. I think it was AT&T. Reach out and touch someone, and that was a voice. We don't even touch. We don't even talk. I mean, I've had this happen with my kids. I go to call them, and they say, "Mom, don't call me. Text me." And I'm like, I don't want to text you. I want to hear your voice, right?
yeah.
So maybe we need to get back to the reach out and touch someone.
Yes, we do. We become too. I'm bad that way too. Like text. Why are you calling me? Just text me. But you're right. Especially this time, we need to start reaching out and touching people again. Yep. So where can you be found? Your website is drchristykane.com, right? Dr. Christy, CHRISTYKANE.com. And
yep.
You can be emailed at hello@drchristykane.com. I saw that on your website.
Yep. And then, like I said, I've got my one book, but I have a new book coming out in June that I'm excited. Cedar Fortis Publishing, and it's going to, I think if they keep my title, it's going to be called Unlocking Boxes Through the Power of Healing.
Oh, nice. And
yeah.
That's in June, you said?
That's when it's due to be released. Yeah. But yeah, people can reach me through the website. We have a Christie's Corner on my website that has good information that we're constantly updating for people to review on different things. So, you know, and we're happy to answer mental health questions as we can.
Awesome. And you can refer people if you can't take them or if it's not your specialty or whatever.
Yeah. Yep. I have openings to take new clients right now. I can also refer to a bunch of my other colleagues that I've vetted that I feel are, effective and can address a lot of different genres.
Awesome. So you're a good place to start for people that don't know where to start.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. They want to get a hold of me.
Number on there, 801-801-735-5971.
Yep, that's correct.
So it's drchristykane.com or 801-801-735-5971.
Yeah, it should be just 801 once. 801-735-5971.
Oh, okay. I don't know why. Yeah. Why am I saying that twice? That's
just the area code 801.
I'm just reading it instead of thinking about it. So excellent.
Good.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Christy. I'm going to link your website and add your phone number with just 1-801 in my show notes. And
okay.
If you're watching this on YouTube, you can also find it on iTunes, etc. And any final words before we sign off?
I'm only going to give you a topic idea. I just finished doing the Leading Saints interview fireside with Kirk Frankum, and I did that one on how to teach children healthy sexuality. So as you're thinking about your topics for next year, if you want to swing back around and invite me to come back, but the one I just did, and I helped with the church is getting ready to put some stuff out. I helped on writing in that area, but healthy sexuality is really going to be a critical factor for us in this electronic world. So,
wow. All right. Yeah, I'll have to start thinking that.
You got that one.
So, thank you all for listening to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness. And you can find me again on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, I think, yeah, and iHeartRadio and youtube.com/Annette Talks. And thank you for listening to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, where freedom lovers gather.